All right, we're back. It's COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals here at Georgian, and it's week 2, lesson 2, part 1. Last week we really did kind of an intro into HTML5, and we also kind of gave out assignment number 1, which again, just to repeat, is due next week, the third week. I don't know why, but that was a bit of a mistake on Blackboard to show it was due this week. But I've seen many of you have already done it or have started. Some of you haven't started, which gives you a chance to do it. It's a very simple assignment. It's very straightforward. There's not a lot of detail in this one because you don't have a lot of tools to do it, right? It's not like you know CSS and JavaScript or frameworks or anything like that. So we're talking about a very straightforward thing. Remember, what I'm looking for right now from you guys is good form and structure, right? Make sure that your page or pages use proper HTML format, like the stuff we talked about earlier. And what I mean by that is when we kick off a project, there are certain requirements you should have for every page, right? We talked about that last time. So remember, what are the 5 requirements or thereabouts that we need for every page? So it's a bit of a question for you guys this morning, right? So the main things, when we start off, what's the first thing that we see on the top of the page? Just off the top, yeah. Doc type, right? I know this is a review, and you're like, well, we talked about this last week. Yes, we talked about it last week. But without a doc type, you know, your browser doesn't understand what to do, and it's going to go to quirks mode. It's not going to render things the right way, right? So we need to put a proper doc type, right? So what's the proper doc type for HTML5? Well, how do we format that thing? Since you answered last time. Yeah. How come it's not HTML5? Remember what I asked? What I said last week? There was why doesn't it just say doc type HTML5? Why? Yeah.
Because you rule out HTML4 and every other type of.
Or 6. Yeah. Let's say as we come before. So the new standard is not to put a number or any kind of a specifier next to the doc type, right? Okay. So after the doc type, we have 2 main sections. Sorry, we have kind of an overall container for the entire web page. What would that be? What's the main container? I'm not going to bring it up. I'm just getting you guys to think about this stuff. So you think about the web page when you're structuring it. The overall container that contains everything on the web page. What is it? Yeah. The HTML tag, right? It's almost like the overall container. Without the HTML tag, you can't do anything, right? That's the overall container. And then there's 2 main parts, right, to the web page structure, right? What are those 2 main parts inside the HTML tag? Yeah. The head and the body. No head, headless chicken, right? I always kind of look at that, right? You need the head to control the different aspects. It doesn't. Most of the pieces of the head do not get rendered on the browser. They just control that, you know, sends specific information to control how the browser renders the page, and it also allows us, the head of the body also allows us to connect things to the web page. That's what it does, right? Now the body itself, right? You've got your body. What goes in the body? What is the body for, right? I know it's very simple and straightforward. Guys, bear with me. But what is it? What's the body for? What do I put in the body? Headers and other content, right? That's where your content lies, and that's what gets rendered. Anything inside the body, pretty much, unless you otherwise specify with CSS or some other control element, it gets rendered onto the page. So if you dump something into the body, it'll spit it out, okay? A little bit of a review. Let's kick off brackets. I want to start with that from that angle today. So let's pull up your editor. Now, if you don't use brackets, you can use your favorite editor. It's not going to hurt me if you say, "Hey, Tom, I don't like brackets." I'm not going to feel hurt. I'm not tied to it. I'm not affiliated, right? Some people may want to use Visual Studio Code because, you know, you're a Visual Studio Code kind of person. That's totally cool, and I'm okay with that, right? And that's kind of a newer editor that's kind of come out lately from Microsoft. I think I may have spoken about that last week, and it kind of looks like this, Visual Studio Code, right? I'll bring it up. It's very similar to what Brackets looks like, or Sublime. It's in the same vein of that kind of thing. The great thing about Visual Studio Code and brackets is it's very lightweight compared to something as big and ugly as Visual Studio. Love Visual Studio, but 70 million lines of code makes it a crazy fat editor. It can do a lot of stuff, right? And a lot of us don't use all the things that Visual Studio can do, right? And if you're in the computer side, on the programming side, you will use, and if not already using Visual Studio. It's big, it's bulky, and it does a million things. But we don't need that kind of bulk when it comes to programming the web. Certainly, it helps to have additional code hinting. What Visual Studio does, and that's why I'm not ruling it out, is it does give you the ability to do additional code hinting that our little editors here, they don't do that. Let me give you an example of that. So I'm going to bring up my virtual machine just to give you another alternative to using to doing stuff, as opposed to the things I've shown you so far, right? Because I'll be honest with you, I kind of interchange between the two. And someone mentioned, I think you mentioned last week, Dreamweaver, right? Like why not Dreamweaver? It's the same reason why I probably wouldn't use Visual Studio off the cuff. If you're learning HTML from the very beginning, it's just excessively heavy. So there's a lot of stuff to do, and it does it all for you to some degree. Okay, so I'm just going to bring this up. If you have Visual Studio, you can certainly follow along with me if you want to try it out. Yeah, it'd be nice if I remember my password. And of course, I got my screen is Windows 10, of course. So Microsoft makes it difficult for me to do stuff, but that's okay. Let's just bring this down a notch. Can't say enough about Microsoft, right? All right, let's take a look here. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio Ultimate 2013. You can download this from Microsoft or from the DreamSpark site. I don't know if you guys are familiar with DreamSpark at all. Yeah, maybe. All students of Georgian and all colleges have access to something called DreamSpark, right? It allows you to download software for free, especially most of the Microsoft software, like Visual Studio, different servers, Windows 10, if you wanted to get that, Microsoft Office, aspects of Microsoft Office, and so on. And you can find that link if you're curious. Let's just bring that link up for you under DreamSpark. If you go to www.dreamspark.com/student, and then the software catalog, software-catalog, right? So here's student. If you notice, then you can do things like download versions of SQL Server, Windows Server 2010 and 2012, different things here that are available for you. You can also get discounts on certifications and other kind of software as well. And if I was to go into, so maybe you might have seen this as well from this perspective, it might look like this for you when it comes up. And there's your 2010, your Windows 8.1, and so on. And you also have access to things like Visual Studio 2015 and 2013. Just a caution for 2015, there's still some things. It's good. It's in its stable format if you're interested in doing that. And by the way, I would accept anything you do here in this class. It's your choice what kind of editor, Dreamweaver, Visual Studio, brackets, Visual Studio Code, whatever you want to use that makes you feel comfortable. Whether you're on the Mac, PC, Linux, it doesn't matter to me. It's all good. Web and internet fundamentals. Web and internet fundamentals. All right. So Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio 2013, you can certainly download from here. Let's go back to that Visual Studio side. Now I'm on the, I've virtualized Windows here for a second for you guys. Open this up. Now I'm going to open up a new project, right? So Visual Studio, if you're a Visual Studio kind of person, let's open this up. And if you want to follow me, like I said, if you have Visual Studio and you want to do it with me, all the power. And I'll show you the differences between what the advantages of using a big-ass editor like this one. And I'll say it like that because that's how big it is. It's like big. It's like a lumbering behemoth, all right? It's like crazy, right? But also really cool in terms of what you can do. And one day when it starts. And by the way, this is by no means a reflection on Microsoft. I'm virtualizing another machine within my machine, right? So, and yeah, of course. Nowadays, Microsoft gets you to sign into everything. because Visual Studio and Microsoft Windows is servers, right? Okay, so I want to start off a basic application. Now, even though it says ASP.NET Web Application, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start off a basic application that I'm going to do. I'm going to call it COMP1002, and it's going to be just a demo, right? So that's all we're doing. I'm not going to create a Git repository, but I am going to press OK. And it's going to be an empty application. I'm not going to accept additional templates. Visual Studio allows you to get to build your websites from a template, right? So you don't start from zero. You start with something, right? And I'm just going to press OK. And when it does that, what Visual Studio does is it kind of sets up your project structure for you in some ways. So here I am. I've got my COMP1002 demo, and I'm going to create my HTML page, my first one. It's a little different than what we saw in brackets. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to say Add. And by the way, you don't have to remember this stuff because I'm recording it. Oh yeah, it's really chugging along today. And I'm going to say HTML page, right? And I'm going to call this index. When I do that, of course, it gives me a bunch of stuff. Bam, right? It has my kind of like a little template of things to start off with. So the doc type is right? And like we said before, HTML is cool. This part's wrong. I wouldn't accept this as part of my template. And even with Visual Studio, I would erase this and start off with something like lang, right, is equal to, oops, if I do this right, is equal to English. See the code hinting it gives me. It gives me a bunch of options for, there's a bunch of enumerations here for different types of English, Australian, English US, English whatever, or just plain English, right? Same thing with meta tags. If I start typing a meta tag in the head of the body, right? So if I say meta tag, and then I go something like character set, look at the code hinting I'm getting, right? And then it also gives me some enumerations, UTF-8, right? So it's a lot easier to start things off here when I type, as an example, as opposed to how we would do it in brackets or Visual Studio Code. So there's lots of advantages here. Let me just zoom out so you can see that. So actually, I'll just unpin this for a second. Okay, so same kind of idea. You put a title, and then you attach CSS or other kind of things in here. We can do the same kind of shortcuts. We did some shortcuts last week with Emmet. Remember, we were talking about shortcuts for doing things like headline tags and so on. And I did something like this. I did a headline tag, and inside my headline tag, I want to say hello world, because let's say we have to do a hello world, right? And then beside it, so on the same level, a sibling of that would be a paragraph tag with a lorem text of 100, right? And then you get one of those. Right? Bang, bang, bang. Same idea that we talked about last week. Shortcuts are available here in Visual Studio just like before. And then if I render it, if I press play on the little big button here, and it's actually debugging in Google Chrome, it'll run a little server in the background, right, to allow me to see my output, right? So that's really a good piece there, right? So from a debugging perspective, if you're planning or being involved in a larger scale application, something that's enterprise level, a lot of us use Visual Studio because of all the code hinting and the IntelliSense and the deep linking that you get that you don't get off the cuff from something like a brackets or Visual Studio Code or something like that. Further than that, the one thing you'll also notice is if we get deeper into it, I'm just going to stop debugging here for a second. And let's say if I add a different folder structure like I asked you guys to add last time, right? So if I say add, and I go into new folder, and I start off something like, let's say I decide there's a folder that's going to be called content for my CSS, and I add in a new folder. Again, you don't have to remember any of this. I'm just showing you this as a demo. Scripts for my CSS, or my JavaScript as an example. And let's say I have another folder called assets where I keep all my images and movies and audio and whatever. Right? And let's say inside my content, I decide that I'm going to put in some kind of cascading style sheet, which we're going to talk about later on in this course. So I want to kind of put a style sheet that's main.css. It'll create the body of the CSS file. Let's just leave it blank for now. But I want to attach it to my index.html file. How do I do that? Instead of typing it, I just drag and drop, right? So there's lots of really cool advantages from this. It's not a WYSIWYG editor in terms of, in this particular way. I'm not going to see the output unless I run it in a browser. But the great advantage of it is it's quick. It does templating really well. There's 1,000, maybe more, extensions and plugins and so on for this thing. And again, it's industry ready. So if you're into, like, from an enterprise perspective, you can program in C#, C++, Visual C++. You can do project with Unity if you're a gamer, right? You can use, instead of mono develop, you can use Visual Studio, all kinds of stuff, but it's super heavy. Right? So if you're not a person who wants to work with this heavy-duty editor, then let's shift back to something like a Brackets or Visual Studio Code. Again, I would accept anything you do. And from a publishing perspective, we're going to talk publishing later on today. How do I publish to the web? How do I get a domain, right? All that kind of stuff. If you haven't done it before, we're going to show you how to do that, right? This is super easy. You don't have to use a separate FTP program. It's built in, right, to Visual Studio. Same thing with Dreamweaver. You can actually do a lot of the FTP operations with Dreamweaver built in. It manages sites really, really well. Whereas with what we're going to do, we're going to use two different things, two different programs. You're going to have your editor and your FTP program, right, which is, we're going to use FileZilla. Okay, just a bit of a preview. Any questions around this stuff, or any comments? Would you use Visual Studio? Is this the editor of your choice? What's your favorite editor, right? We talked about this last week. We said, what's your favorite editor? And someone said Brackets, because I said Brackets is really cool. Right? But would anyone oppose to using Visual Studio, right? It's awesome, actually. There's a really, I mean, if I wouldn't say it would be awesome if it would be like, let's say a year or 2 years ago, I'll be like, no, don't touch Visual Studio. It's crazy. It's too much, right? Things have changed, and that's the thing. Like I talked to you guys about before. Be platform agnostic. Don't worry about the software, who makes it or whatever. Use the best tools that you can for the job. Who cares if it's Microsoft or Apple or someone else in the future? Today it's Apple. Tomorrow it's Microsoft. The next day it's going to be Google with their Chromebook or something else. You never know how things are going to turn. So don't be closed-minded, especially from an IT perspective. You need to be open-minded and use whatever tools are out there, right? And you need to absorb information and understand tools and platforms as fast as you can. Right? Every 3 months, things change in the industry, if this is what you're interested in doing. Yeah?
You have student license?
Yeah, like I said, there's DreamSpark, right? So if you go to DreamSpark, right?
It doesn't allow my Georgian or student Georgian email addresses for verification.
But if you go here, if you go to e5onthehub.com, as an example, they will allow it. That's funny. It will verify Georgian. I got verified the other day with Georgian. This one is the official link, right? As an example, they have Visual Studio 2013 here. This is the place to go, right? And if I was to go here, right, I have the same, Georgian email that you do, right? There's different versions, and I recommend still sticking with Visual Studio 2013 for now. Update 5 would be the right way to go. So if you open this up, you can certainly download the latest version. Now, even though it says 32-bit, don't worry about that. That's what they have, right? But it's the ultimate version, and it runs really, really well. Okay. On top of that, you would add in Visual Studio Web Essentials. That's the other thing that I would recommend with Visual Studio. So if I was going to go to, VS Web Essentials, because I'll be honest with you, Visual Studio alone is pretty cool, but Visual Studio with Web Essentials, talking about additional support, that's a free download and an install that helps you do things like CoffeeScript, TypeScript, HTML, all kinds of other stuff. An example of that would be things like HTML minification. When you hover over images, they preview them. It does the Zen coding thing, the Emmet that we talked about before. There's a lorem pixel generator, which is even better than the one we saw on Brackets. What do I mean by that? I mean, if I want to put in a picture or an image, I can do something like this, right? I'm in here, I can go Pix. I want an image that's, let's say, 300 by 300. And I press Tab. That's it. When I go back to run it, now I got an image that's 300 by 300, random. Right? And why would we want this, right? Because when we do layouts, when we do prototyping, right, you want some stand-in images to see how your layout's going to look, right? Without, maybe you don't have any content right now because, you know, your customer hasn't given you the content yet, but you still want to start laying out the page and do some prototyping or mock-ups, right? It allows you to do that and quickly mock up a page, like bang, 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 right? So Visual Studio Web Essentials is a great companion for Visual Studio, right? Because it gives you a bunch of different things here. And again, you would get that from you also have access to things like, now you have access to Office 365 through DreamSpark. You have access to Azure cloud services. You have access to all kinds of stuff. And we're going to actually talk about Azure today a little bit as a platform of, perhaps one of your platforms of choice for deployment. Right? We're going to talk about that. Okay. So Visual Studio. Let me just shut this one down. I'll keep it open. Just in a virtual machine, but we'll go back. And I'll put this up too in case you guys want to look at it later on. So what about Visual Studio Code? It's not Visual Studio necessarily, like I said before. It's kind of a lightweight version, but it's very similar to something like Brackets in that, if you notice, it gives me a chance to decide what kind of page I'm looking at. It supports a lot of different kind of pages, including TypeScript. Right, that's you know, the latest version of almost like a superscript of JavaScript. And by the way, if you're already started with something like JavaScript, if you're someone who skips ahead and does your own reading, and you should be if you're a developer, right? And if you start looking at JavaScript, you might notice JavaScript is a pain in the ass, right? It's hard to learn, and it's and the reason for that is because it looks simple. When you start looking at other people's JavaScript, it looks like spaghetti, right? There's no rhyme or reason for it. You're looking at it and going, I don't understand. It's almost as bad as PHP, right? PHP is really bad. But when you look at JavaScript from a developer perspective, there's no object orientation. There's no structure to it. There's no data types. But there's lots of flexibility, right? That's the beautiful thing about JavaScript. You can make it your own, right? But some people don't know how to do that. Well, TypeScript, what it does is it creates a structure for your JavaScript. So if you want to do things like to produce enterprise-level applications again, it gives you the structure, gives you the code hinting. It allows you to do modularity very simply. And it kind of, if you want to create classes and use inheritance and everything else that you're learning in other courses, object-oriented design, TypeScript is the way to go, right? And TypeScript, again, is supported by Microsoft, accepted by Google in their AngularJS project and AngularJS 2. Even React, one of the leading front-end frameworks right now, React and Angular, they both have TypeScript support, so you're in good hands with TypeScript. As we're moving towards the new JavaScript standard, which is ECMAScript 6. We'll talk about that near the end of the course. Okay. So a really good editor if you want to use that. I just want to propose these other ones just to say that I'm not going to just push you just to use one or another. But let's go back to Brackets because that's what we have to use one, so we're comfortable with at least one of them. Okay. So again, how do I do this? What's the best way to do it? And I have a little project file here that we used last week, I think, somewhere. If not, we'll make one. I did not. Still have it. Let's make one. So I'm going to go new folder on my desktop, and I'm using a Mac, but it'll be the same for you on Windows machines, right? I'm going to use. I'm just going to rename this thing COMP1002, and it's lesson 2, right? And so I've got my folder, and what I can do is I can start working on my folder structure here inside my my operating system first, right? So let's just make a couple more folders. I would do this with me, guys, just as a practice. Please don't just watch me. This is not a watch course. This is a do course, like I said last time. So let's do this. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a folder called content. Again, other people would call this CSS. Some people put make a CSS folder. But I'm making it so it's generic enough that it'll work on any system, right? I'm also going to create another folder called assets. Just folders. That's all I'm doing right now. I have to get you prepared and get you used to it. Another one called scripts. We don't have any scripts right now. Assets, content, scripts. Those are the main ones. And if you want to go further with assets, let's do that just for practice. we want to put things like lowercase images, lowercase fonts, lowercase audio, right? Again, just extra folders inside my assets folder where I would compartmentalize my files. I want to put them in their own places. By the way, if I'm making a game with Unity, I'm going to do the same thing, right? If I'm using a game with Unreal, if I'm making a 3D game with Unreal or Unity, I want to control my folder structure because I'm going to have a lot of assets, right? Same thing with web, right? Whether you're making a bigger project, if I'm making an e-commerce website, I'm going to organize myself, right? Because eventually I'm going to have thousands and thousands of assets to deal with. And if I leave them all in the root of the program or the code, it's going to be really messy. And I want to be structured and clean, right? I talked about having a clean room last week, and this is the way it is. We create our room first, our compartments for our room, and we go like that, right? Assets, content, scripts. And you can add others here. All right, the other thing is sometimes what happens is, yes?
Sorry for interrupting. I noticed that you're doing uppercase assets, like all the titles of the main folders are uppercase. Secondary folders are lower.
Convention. You don't have to do it this way. I'm doing it this way because if I do it here like this, I can take my project and port it to Microsoft Visual Studio, no problem, right? If I do it the other way around, if I make it lowercase CSS or underscore CSS, which you might have seen before, and images on the main root and all that kind of stuff, not compatible. So I want to make my project compatible with everything, and that's why I'm making it like this, right? So I don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? I might have to move into a more robust platform. Okay, so that's a good question, but thank you for that one. Okay, so assets, content, and scripts, and this is the one I want to pass into brackets, right? So I'm just going to close this up, minimize this over, put it over here, and bring up brackets now. So I'm just going to, again, if you have brackets on your system, here it is. I'm going to make this a little smaller so you can see it. And what I want to try and do is drag and drop. This is the simplest way to do this. Drag and drop this folder right onto my inside the sidebar here. And what it does, it automatically takes on the properties, the assets, content, scripts of what my folder looks like, right? So here's my folder. As you can see, it's the same as this. And that's the beauty of a lightweight editor like this. It takes 2 seconds for me to set up a project. Whereas, if you noticed in Visual Studio before, I had to go in, I had to set up the project, I had to decide which template. It's a little bit easier, right? And that's why people are use this primarily. Also, most modern web application framework right now is the mean stack or full stack, where you use MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node, right? And so that's a full stack that uses JavaScript on the front end and back end, and also for the database, right? Not really great with Visual Studio yet, right? Really nice when you use an editor like this and a compound editor and terminal view. So that's why it's good to get used to this kind of setup as well. In fact, if anything, we work as kind of in a hybrid situation. I kind of work in more than one editor, like I talked about before. Sometimes I might have Dreamweaver up because there's certain things that Dreamweaver can do for me that help me produce really quick, right? Applications, and we're talking from a rapid application development perspective, web applications, right? And the same thing with Visual Studio, and that's why I set up my folder structure that way, so it's compatible with anything. Okay. Now that's the first part. The next part is I want to add an index.html file. This is just a review from last week. I'm going to add a file in here by right-clicking and saying New File, and I'm just going to rename this index.html. And if you notice automatically on this side, it comes into my folder structure like I showed you last time. Okay, my index.html is blank. This is bad, right? I need to add in all those piece parts that I told you about before, and guess what? I have an example of it here, right? I just pulled it up with Visual Studio. I'm going to pull it back up. And I'll run this in tandem today a little bit. So here's my demo. And it's going to go right here, right? The same structure we talked about with the doc type first, HTML, head, and then the body, and then different piece parts to those things, right? So here it all is. And the great thing is I can copy all this from one to the other. I'm going to do that. There it is. And you have most of the stuff I need. Now, I'm not going to put this stuff in the body front. I'm going to blank this stuff out. we don't need this. And I don't have a main CSS. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to change this just for the sake of speed here. I'm going to change this to what we're doing today, which is lesson 2. Here's something that I'm going to do. Did I show you where I'm going to store your stuff next week or last week on GitHub? I'm going to start using GitHub for that. Did I talk about that a lot? No? So I want to share my files with you. I want you to follow along, right? So what's the best place for us to follow along together? GitHub, all right? For most developers, if you've never used GitHub or whatever, it's okay. But I think it's like one of the missing aspects of all programs across all colleges. They don't really teach GitHub in a course on its own, revision control or version control. It's an add-on or ancillary technology that we talk about when we do programming, right? So what is GitHub anyway? Well, let's take a look. So bear with me while I open up the window. If you're trying to follow along and copy this in, don't worry, we'll get back to this in a bit. In fact, if anything, I'll share it with you on GitHub, right? All right, so I go to github.com. I have an account, but you can certainly make up an account for GitHub as well to share your files, right? So how does this look if I'm logged in, so this is kind of a weird view. Let's use incognito mode so I can show you what it looks like for a new user to come into GitHub. So github.com, there it is. You sign up for free. And Microsoft DreamSpark has a student, it allows students to download the student pack for GitHub. You get 5 free private repos, an SSL certificate, and a free domain if you sign up with Microsoft DreamSpark. That's pretty cool, right? So let's take a look at that. So if I go back to, see if I got DreamSpark up here. I do not. I don't have the right one. Again, you have to do this one. If you go to this piece here, and again, it has to verify you for this to work. But here, if you notice, GitHub Education, if you download this pack here, again, you have to verify your email and all that stuff, but it does give you all this extra stuff, and it gives you access to things like GitHub with private repos. And you're going to ask, what's a repo, right? Think of it as a folder, right? But what I'm doing with GitHub is I want to keep track of my changes, right? So there's a few really good reasons to use something like GitHub or a cloud service where I store my files, and that's what I'm going to be doing, right? That's separate from Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or one of those. You might think, well, that's a storage system as well, right? GitHub, the great thing about that is I'm able to, I'm just going to go into GitHub for a second. GitHub allows me to collaborate and share my files with you. That's number one, very, very simply, in fact, to the world if I want to. From a developer perspective, if you're a young developer, the great thing about GitHub is it's a good portfolio piece. If you have a bunch of your files, you go to an interview, and I go up on GitHub, and when I look at your work, I can see what you're doing, right? So it's a great place to keep your good work. It's a good place to collaborate with other students, right? If you want to work on a project together, you can do that. And it also allows us to compare previous versions of our code. How many people have actually done any kind of coding in the class? Like any kind of coding? I'm sure some of you have, right? And how many people have run into something where like it used to work, but it doesn't work anymore? I don't know why. You run into that problem? I run into that problem all the time. It's like a needle in a haystack, right? Trying to find the code. What's the problem? Well, the great thing about GitHub is you can step back, right? It's like taking a snapshot of your code, right? And then going back to a previous snapshot and saying, oh, I see. This is what I did wrong. And I can revert back to that. And it's a great place for a backup. So this is where you sign up. You can sign up for free. And I do encourage you to do that. I'm not going to go over the details of how to use GitHub. And there's lots of really cool tutorials. But in later courses, like for example, in advanced web programming and other courses that we do here at Georgian, we do go into more detail about using GitHub. I'm going to use GitHub with you guys as a place where you guys can find me and you can see my files. So we can follow along together if I'm going too fast. Or if you want to say, hey, what did you do on YouTube? This is the place to go. All right, so let's get back to that. So I'm going to go into my GitHub, which is this. And I'm going to set up, and you don't have to remember this, by the way. I'm going to set up a new repository, right, for GitHub. I'm going to change this. I have a organization I've created called Georgian College. Kind of stole that one. It's, by the way, it's domain unique, eh? So there is no more Georgian College available, just mine. Okay? I just happened to get it. Anyways, under Georgian College, we're going to call this, I know it's terrible, comp, it's like I'm a squatter, right? Comp of 1002, lesson 2. That's what we're going to put in there, right? And if you notice, there's a big check mark here on the side that says, this one is unique to my sets of repositories, so Georgian College. I don't want to initialize a README file. It just gives me information of what the repo is about, but I'm going to create my repo. And the great thing about this, it gives me like this URI, and I can set this up somewhere on my desktop. Now, I already have a COMP1002 lesson 2 folder, and I'm going to connect to it. And I'll do a few commands here on the terminal. And don't be afraid when I do this, right? Don't go, oh my God, I have to learn how to do command line. No, you don't. I'm just showing you what I would do, and I'm recording it for you. If you ever want to follow my steps, you can always go online and watch the video. Okay, so here I am in command line, and I want to go to my desktop. And in my desktop, I'm going to go to COMP1002. And if you notice, I've got a folder structure like this, but this is not a repository yet. I've got to initialize the repository by doing a git init. I'm also going to git init. That's interesting. That's new. And then after I do my that's new. I've never seen that before. Queue to quit. No problem. Agreed. Yeah, sure. That's a new thing. Never seen that before. Maybe it updated something. Anyways, git add dot is basically what that does is it I need to do sudo git add dot. What it does is it adds in all my files into my COMP1002 lesson 2 into the repository. And then what I want to do is sudo commit. Don't worry about the sudo, that's a super user do. -m, and I want to initialize it with initial commits. And once I've done that, they're interesting. Oh yeah, it'd be nice to put git in there. Sudo's freaking me out here. I never had to do that before. And then I need to connect it, and there's a really cool connection script over here to do that. Here we go. I'm going to copy this one, go to my terminal. Love when things change. And I'm going to paste. Of course, I need to do a super user do on this one every time. Let's just do that. That's fine. And I'll fix that later on when we're not together. So that's going to take a little bit of doing. Right, good. So I've connected my local repo to my remote repo in the cloud, and now I'm going to push to it. Sudo push -u, like it says on the file here, origin master. Sudo git push -u. Anyways, and then once it's pushed on, without much complaining, if I look at this, I can see that now you can see my files here, and this is the place you'll go to find me. Okay, so github.com/Georgian College/COMP1002 lesson 2. Right, that's where my files are going to be. Really long-winded, right? But that's what they are. And if you notice, all I have in here is an index.html. How come? How come I don't have the rest of my folder structure in there, right? And the reason for that is there's nothing in the folders. They're all empty. I don't have anything inside any of those folders. There's just a structure right now that's local to me. Once I start entering things into the folders, then the folder structure will appear here on GitHub. So if you want to follow along, and if you actually click on index.html here, when you go up on GitHub, you'll see this. So you don't have to try and rush along and try and kind of connect with me. What I'll do is I'll try and push off then up to GitHub so you guys can follow along if I go too fast, okay, today. Okay, GitHub. And again, if you notice, I'm storing my files up here, and I can add a README. And the README, what it does is it's a place where we describe what the repo is for. By the way, there's thousands of GitHub repos out there. I think thousands might be a low number, tens of thousands, I would say. And we can describe what the repo is here, what it does. And also, if I'm creating a new application and I want you to instructions on how to use it, a lot of times developers put their instructions right here in the README file, right? So I'm going to put in something like this, repo for COMP1002 web, and then the fundamentals, just to see what it looks like. Okay, and then I'm going to save that. I'm going to create a new commit, another snapshot. And if you notice, I have 2 commits up here. So I've done 2 snapshots, one, the initial commit, and now I've just added to create my README file. I'm going to go back and do that later. But there's a problem, right? There's my little README that shows you what kind of a introduction into what this repository is about, this little folder that's online and on GitHub, right? I'm behind by 1 commit because I only pushed 1. I don't have the README file locally. Let's pull it back down into my files. And how do I do that? Sudo git pull, right? And then it pulls down my README file. And now locally, if I was to look at my folder structure, right? For, not this one, for what I'm doing here, here's what this looks like. You can see that I've got my readme.md file. And then in brackets, I also have it there as well, right? So there is no physical connection right now to GitHub. It's not a persistent connection. So GitHub doesn't know what versions of stuff that I'm working on, and I don't know what's on GitHub. So if you're working with somebody else in collaboration, right, the best practice is to pull first so you can sync up with what's going on GitHub. This is the simple way to do it. And then after you work on your files, you push to the cloud. And then your partner or partners will pull first, syncing up with you, and so that you're in line. There's other ways of merging your work with theirs and so on, but it's out of scope for this course. Again, just a little bit of workflow. So why am I showing you GitHub? Because we're going to talk about deployment methods later on. One of them is FTP, but more of a modern one these days is GitHub or some kind of repository online. So you deploy to GitHub, and the old way would be to connect FTP to a website somewhere or a web host, and then push up your files, right? That's passé, I'm sorry to say, right? I'm going to show you that way today with FileZilla, but the right way to do it is use something like a modern repository like GitHub, Bitbucket, Visual Studio Online, or so on, whatever you want to choose, Perforce. And then what you do from there is you use that as a deployment target to push to your website directly. And sometimes what you can do is, from GitHub, you can have your host watching your GitHub repo, so if you make any changes, it automatically updates your website. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. Most of the time we want to do a staging site, we do all our changes, and then we push from the staging site to production. All right, so that's why I'm showing you this as well. I want you guys to see if there's other ways of deploying your work online. Okay, so I've got this, my stuff here, and we're going to go into lesson 2 with PowerPoints. Again, I'm not going to read all the PowerPoint presentation, not every slide, but they're there for your support. We're going to be talking about 2 things for this piece. The first piece that we're going to be talking about is semantic HTML and what that means, right? So how do I structure my web pages if I want to add more structure? All we've learned right now from last week is H1 tags, so heading tags, and some paragraph tags. That's really not enough for us to structure our website, right? We need to add more content in there. And the way to do that, of course, is to get more, learn more tags. If you read ahead, and I certainly encourage you to do so, read the book, that's part of the course, then you would have read that we're going to do chapter 3 today, and also chapter 21, which is the deployment chapter. It's a very short chapter. Okay, so those are the 2 chapters we're covering today. All right, so I want to create more structure in my page. Right now, I only have a title and I have a body. And again, I'm starting off from a demo perspective, and then what we're going to do is the second video that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation to support what I'm just doing here. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Let's do together early to get this lab piece done. Okay. So let's take a look. So I want to add some more content. And in the early days, we had a generic wrapper for our content. And this predates HTML5, all right, before HTML5. We had something called a div tag. Who knows about div tags? Some of you have done HTML stuff before. You've done div tags. Div tags are non-semantic. They don't mean anything. There's no context to them. They're just a container tag. Okay, so think of this. So why do I need a container tag? If I have a container tag, I can target the container tag with my style sheet, with my CSS, so I can rearrange my layout any way I want. Think about a container tag as a box, and I can move that box around and format that stuff that's in the box any way I like. Okay? So let's start with that. Let's start with some generic tags. It's kind of a reverse way of doing things, as opposed to showing you all the good tags and then telling you about this one. I'd rather show you about the bad stuff first, and then we'll fix it. I think it's a better way. So let's start off with a div tag. So let's type div, and if I press tab, it gives me the opening and closing tags. Remember, the opening tag always starts off with you know, just the less than and greater than sign, and then the closing tag has the backslash, or the forward slash, I mean, right? And that's what this looks like. So this beginning and opening. Think about this as our code block, right? If you're a traditional programmer, anything in here, I mean, we're describing a container right now, okay? There is no name for this container or anything like that. It's just a generic container. That's all it is. All right, so let's put in some stuff. I want to put in then a headline tag, right? So we'll put an H1. And again, from a hierarchy perspective, it goes H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, right? The higher the number, the higher. So from 6, that's the smaller or lower in the hierarchy from an outline perspective. So if you're a person who's done print and marketing, advertising, that kind of stuff, it's like you're doing another heading that's lower and lower on the scale, like a subheading, and subheading to the subheading. Think about an H1 tag as a section tag. If I was going to talk about a big section, if I'm looking at a PDF document, that's what would be there. It would be the chapter heading, if you will, right? And then an H2 tag might be some other section in the chapter. An H3 tag would be a subsection of that chapter, and so on. You want to be able to use different tags, and it means something. They're meaningful, right? An H1 tag, again, doesn't have a lot of semantic meaning. It just means that we're adding in a header or headline that means that we're going to put some kind of headline in here. So let's do that. So let's put in a headline, and we'll just call it first headline or first heading. Okay, so first heading. And inside the heading, I also want to put a paragraph tag. I'm going to do this longhand right now, and then I'll do the shorthand after, okay? So I'm going to put a paragraph tag. Again, a paragraph tag, like I said last time, it doesn't have to be used just for paragraphs. You can put any text inside of there, but we really do want to format all of our stuff. By default, your browser will add spaces. And just as a default, there's some default styling that's going to come into play that's going to move your headline and your heading and your paragraph tag away from each other. Okay? So let's take a look at that. And if I want to add some text, here's where I'm going to do a shortcut because I'm not going to type a whole paragraph. Let's do lorem 50 and press tab. And that ends, it just gives us a little bit of text to work with, right? Certainly, if you want to type it longhand, go ahead, right? I'll just be ahead of you. Doesn't make any sense, right? We're not going to type in some stuff, right? Lorem 50. If it doesn't work for you, then you don't have Emmet installed. Remember we talked about that last week? You need to have Emmet installed in your brackets. If I click here on the little Lego piece, right? What looks like a Lego piece on the right, you're going to have, it's going to pull up all my plugins and so on, my extensions. If I look for Emmet, right? So if I start typing Emmet, this is the one that I want. And you can certainly download this, a free download and install for your brackets, right? So you can get your shortcuts here. Okay. All right, so we've got our div tag and our paragraph tag here, and we have an H1 tag, and that's pretty much how we started the web. We started off like this, and we would just keep on doing things with our div tags. It would be div tag hell, all right? Nested div tags, one div tag after another, and then that's how the old pages used to work. HTML5 rolled around, we started saying things like, this doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't it be nice if we could describe what we're doing so it's human readable, right? And from an SEO perspective, search engine optimization, isn't it better for the search engine to be able to describe what I'm looking at, right? So I know that if I'm looking at a section or article or the side or whatever I'm looking at, I can see what this div tag means, right? Okay. And let's talk about IDs and classes for a second. Okay? We're skipping ahead a little bit, but I want you to understand this. I can assign an ID attribute to the starting tag of any of any tag that I want, all right, of any element. So let's take a look at that. I would do something like this. Type with me. ID is equal to, in brackets or in quotations, put whatever ID you want to assign. So here's my div tag. It's a generic container, and it looks like I have my first heading, right? I could call this something like, you know, main, right? My main ID. This is my main div tag. Now, you're going to ask the question one day, if I can also do this, right? Here, let me put this in a class. We're going to talk about both things. Class, main content. Actually, I'll put it like this. Main content. Maybe I'll capitalize everything so you can see the difference here. And I'll save everything. Okay. So what's the difference between an ID then and a class? And when you hear class, developers automatically jump to the conclusion that I'm creating a class, like a C# class, or this is not that kind of class. Yes. It's like a grouping, yeah. And I would say that's a very good way of putting it. ID, then, is a unique identifier that's only supposed to be put in one tag on your page, ever, right? It would accept, the browser will accept, you can put it everywhere you want, right? But semantically, and from a best practice perspective, it's bad form, all right? It's only one place. It's a unique identifier. Why? It's not just a place that we can use for targeting a style. We don't want to use ID tags in general for targeting style, all right? Like I want to make a style change to this container. And the container, by the way, would be anything between the div tags, right? Like all this stuff here. I don't want to just I don't want to target my ID. That's typically not a good practice these days, right? I might want to target my ID if I want to jump there. If I want to do some kind of navigation to jump to this section, right? That's a good reason to use the ID. Or if I have a unique identifier that I want to style in a certain way that I can't really target with class, right? Classes are used that I can use them over and over again. Let's say I have the same set of styles. We're going to talk about styling later on. That I want to apply to more than one container, right? Like you said, a grouping. I can use the same class, as an example, in more than one container, right? So I can use the same styles. Like let's say I want this container, its main content, doesn't make any sense. But let's say I said this container is some kind of content container. So I made my class, I say it's content, right? It's a content class, right? So because it's a content class, the content class comes along with some styles, font size, maybe a font type, maybe some different kinds of line spacing, and so on, because I want to format everything that has a content class with it with some kind of style. That's a good use of a CSS class, right? I don't want to target it typically with my ID. ID is just identifying this as a special container. Typically in the old days, right? I'm just going to erase this for a second. In the old days, we use ID not only to identify the generic container, but also its purpose. For example, main, like we said before. Here's our main. And I can also use some other div tags. Let's set up another div tag here. I'll use my shorthand this time, okay? So div, here's the shorthand. Pound, right? Pound meaning ID. That's what it means. And then header, and then tab, right? I'll undo that. And the shorthand is really cool because it saves you typing, right? Div, pound, header, and then inside my header, I want to have some kind of navigation. Guess what I would be putting in the old days? I put another div tag. I'll put another div tag with an ID of, nav or something like that, or navigation. And then inside my navigation, I would put an unordered list. Inside my unordered list, I would put some list items, let's say 5 list items. And inside my list items, I would have anchor tags. And inside my anchor tags, you see where it's going, right? Inside my anchor tags, I would have some link text, link number. And this is the syntax for doing one of these. Are you ready? Type what I type here, right? Let me know when you're ready to tab in, right? Shorthand. It's going to save us time, right? But you need to understand what all this means, and I'm going to explain it to you. Ready? Press tab, it gives me this, right? I'll undo that so you can see it again, right? So what am I saying here? I'm saying I want a div tag with a ID of header. Inside of that, because the greater than sign means inside of whatever the previous element is, I want another div tag, so nested inside the other one, another container with a ID of navigation. Inside that container, I want an unordered list. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then inside the unordered list, I want 5 list items, each of them having anchor tags, hypertext anchor tags, with link text that says link number, and the $ means increment the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many I have, right, for each of those. So if I press tab, it gives me this. Shorthand, right, Emmet. I encourage you to look up the documentation for Emmet. It's really super useful, and it gives us the ability to do this. But let's take a look at this for a second. So again, I'm looking at structure here in semantics, right? This is bad structure. Why? Because I have, even though it'll work in a web page, by the way, right? I have my div tag, my outer div tag, identifying this one as a header, this big piece here, right? My inner div tag, which I can nest, I can certainly nest in here, right? Identifies this piece as navigation, right? So this is my navigation, my nav links, if you will. And I want them to be across the top of the page. Right now, they're just going to go vertical because I have no styling to them, right? And then my unordered list, that's what I'm defining here. My unordered list, right, is my content from my links, right? And then each of the list items, these are list items, each of the list items contain a link, my href tag, right? Href means it's my hyperlink, right? As well as my link text, which is link number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. And that's all nested in here. So when you first look at this, you're like, if you're a casual observer, you're like, what the hell is going on, right? So how do we fix this with modern HTML? We're going to talk about that in a second. But let's render this to the page and see what it does. All right, so I'm going to click this little lightning bolt. Remember what the lightning bolt does in brackets is it allows us to watch our changes, right? So it brings up a little browser here. And this is what it looks like right now. You notice there's some, you can't see the container tags, right? You can't see the div tags, right? There is no, visibility here. All it is a container tag. And if you notice, because I've made an unordered list, I have a bunch of links that go nowhere right now, right? And if we use a little bit of styling, we can make these links go this way. We can put these links on the side. We can do all kinds of stuff. And like I told you before, the biggest problem with most web developers is not the HTML piece, the one I'm teaching right now. It's the CSS. Generically, or if I was going to say generally, we suck at CSS, all of us, really bad, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because CSS, you might think HTML is a little bit quirky or whatever. JavaScript might be a little bit unstructured, but CSS is a mess when you start looking at it for the first time. And if you don't understand, if you've never done print before, when you look at CSS, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. What are they doing here? What is the CSS that you're speaking of? What is it? What does it mean? How do I style? How does this piece style this piece? How do I target different aspects of my page, my layout? And even when I know how to target them, how do I really do some fine tuning and move things around and put them in the way I want to put them in? And so what people do, they download frameworks because it's easy, and they copy code from the web. And they slap stuff together to make up their web pages. By the way, I'm guilty of that too, right? In the early days, I used to do that, right? Because I didn't understand the web. I didn't understand pages. And if you're guilty of that today, it's okay. Join me, man, brothers and sisters, because we're all guilty of stealing stuff from the web and putting it together and slapping it together and selling it to a client for a lot of money, right? Never done that? Oh, damn, I'm the only one, right? Especially things like WordPress, right? People use WordPress because it's an easy install. It takes 5 minutes to install and you charge a lot of money, right? Again, it's like not understanding a product, but yet selling it or using it. We don't want to be users. If you're a programmer, sir, you want to be developers. In order for you to get in developer mind, you need to understand the inner workings of the beast, so to speak, right? So again, if you notice here, I've got my browser. And if I expand my browser, my text conforms to my browser. See, my paragraph text moves around. If I move my paragraph around, it kind of changes the way it lays out. It flows a little bit differently, yeah.
Will that also affect the size of images or
It will. The images won't resize unless I use CSS, but it will reflow them. It'll put them in different positions if I just put an image here, as an example, right? All right, so again, from the earliest parts of the web, this is how we used to do it with generic tags. And we did that because this is what we knew. We didn't have additional tags from HTML5. The new HTML5 tags are semantically correct. They tell us a story about what's going on. So let's replace some of these old tags with what the HTML tags look like today. All right, so I'm going to replace this div tag. I'm going to just type over it. I'm going to erase this piece up to here and type in header. Notice this is an error now because this should be header down here, right? And what header does, this is the first one you should learn, is it creates semantic meaning for me, right? I know what this means. If I was to look at this from a context perspective, I know this is the header, or could be the masthead of my page, right? The place where I'm going to have navigation, the place where I'm going to have my logo, perhaps. The place where I'm going to have different pieces of my content that kind of introduce my page, right? The top of my page is my header, right? And the same thing goes with my navigation. This doesn't make any sense, right? I want to put something like this, like a nav, right? So that replaces that. A little bit more clear now. Under a list doesn't change, right? That's the same. That's exactly the same way that it looks today in the modern web, right? As we go down here, if this is really the main content, right, then you can change this to a couple things. One of them is a very common one to do. You can only do this once per page, by the way, is main. Right? You can put this, change this to main, right? So there's our main. And one thing we're missing here, right, is our footer, right? Let's put our footer in here. So we'll put our footer. And in our footer, we'll put in some other information, like, for example, a copyright statement. And there's a special character or a character code we can use. Right? If you use an ampersand, as an example, it pulls up some information here. And if I say copy, right? Ampersand copy, what it does is it says, give me the copyright symbol. You know the C that's inside the circle? I want that to come out, right? And I want to put in copyright, 2015, which is kind of your copyright statement. You might have sub-navigation, let's say for your privacy policy, your terms of use. You might have other things in there that you kind of share. Sub-navigation in terms of breadcrumbs. Some people put in other navigation, like contact information, again, especially if you're selling a site to some kind of customer that wants their phone number to be produced over and over again. The footer is usually for that. And also, if I have additional articles, other things other than my main content, right? I could also take this main content here to be our first article, right? So I can bury almost one container within another, again, from just to demonstrate, just to give readability to my content. So again, I'll put something like this, an article up here, and I'm just going to take this closing tag and put it underneath my my paragraph tag for a second. All right, so here it is. I've got my article inside my main tag, and if I may have a second article, right? So that's my chapter article. I do another article, and articles are just containers, just like a div tag. But they kind of describe what I'm doing. I'm actually producing some kind of second article, right? I can have as many articles as I want. That makes sense. This time I'll use an H2 tag, like a secondary heading. So this is my second heading. Doing this longhand with some kind of paragraph tag, and with lorem, a smaller amount of lorem text, let's lorem 20, right? Some kind of second article or whatever. And as you can see, I can continue to build my content this way. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to rerun it here in my browser to see what I get. Let's actually do this again. There's my second heading, and there's my copyright statement. Take a look. That's what it would look like now. So I've got my header, my main content, which is these two pieces, right? That's where it is. I've got my first article and my second article. If you notice, the heading goes smaller for my second article, right? This could be the chapter heading. This could be an introduction. This could be the first kind of part that I'm talking about in my my blog, let's say, or my post, whatever I'm doing here, my book. And this is my subnavigation up here, right? So I've replaced some of the generic tags, like I showed you before, and it looks like a long list of stuff here, right? When I'm structuring my my pages, right? I've replaced them instead of the div tag, because I don't want to go into div hell again, right? I use my other containers that make semantic sense, make sense contextually to what I'm doing, right? So I'm doing a header, then I'm going to use a header tag. I'm using a main, if this is the main content, I'm going to use the main tag. If I'm writing an article, I'm going to use the article tag to surround my content so that I can still target those areas just like I would any other generic container. I can still use generic containers, and we often do. Sometimes what we want to do is we want to wrap the entire main article here with other generic containers like div tags, right, as an example, because I want to affect them with CSS, and there's no other semantic meaning that makes any sense. For example, I'm not really putting it to contain from a content perspective just for styling, and that's why I still would use div tags today to really target styling.
How do we target this article in CSS?
Well, you'd want to probably give it some kind of class associated with it, right? So I would probably do something like this. Maybe what I want to do is this one here. If I was going to add a class to my first article, maybe I'm going to call it first article, right? Or I might just call it something like content one or whatever. It could be a content class. So every one of my articles, I'm going to put content on this one too. Let me give you an example, right? So here's my content. So both my articles have the content class associated with them, which means they're both going to have the same styling so far, right? I haven't talked about CSS yet, but imagine that I have some formatting that I'm going to apply to both of my articles now, because I can target, I can look for, right? I can look for, or I can select, right? I can say, find any container that has content as that has content as a class, and then change the formatting so that I have, as an example, the right fonts and colors and so on, right? All the formatting that I want, have margins and padding and all the other stuff that I want to include there. I can use the content class for that. And I can use another class, because you don't have to just use one class in the quotations. I can use many classes, right? When I use the class attribute, I can use one or more classes. So here's another one. So I can say, well, this is a content. I want to use the class of content and first article, first_article, right? So it's a first article. I want it to be different than this other article over here, right? So when my first article, maybe I want to make it bold. I want to put it in quotations, or I want to do something different. I can also emphasize things. If I want to use, let's say, this first part of the paragraph here, I want to emphasize it, I want to italicize it. I can do that. I can do something like this. I can use the M emphasis tag, right? Let's just do this together here. Or I can put it around lorem ipsum, right? And this will emphasize or italicize this piece of text. I can go that low without using any special CSS. And other places, for example, I can use, if I want to bold something by default, I can make this one strong, right? I want to make this, I want to use a strong tag because I want to bold this one, right? So I'm targeting text now. I'm not targeting a paragraph as an example for style. This is a bit of the old way of doing it, styling, if you will, right? And let's say I want to separate my footer, right, from my main content. Sometimes what you also see is, again, I don't recommend this, but it's still in wide use, right? Underneath my main container, sometimes what you might see is an HR tag, a horizontal rule, a line. That's what that does. Okay. And then when I try and check this out again, if I bring up my web page, right, it'll look like this. All right, so here's my lorem ipsum. Take a look with it in italics. And now this lorem ipsum down here in the second paragraph is bold. Right? again, all I'm doing here is I'm marking up my content, right? That's what I'm doing. That's what hypertext markup language is all about. Marking up my content here and describing it as best as I can, right, from a context perspective for two reasons. One, so for search engines, they can find my content easier, right? That's one that helps. So HTML5 really helps search engines find things organically without using meta tags. Because the old way, we used to put a bunch of tags, meta tags, at the top of our web page. It says, and I put a bunch of these keywords. I would put keyword, it would be keyword hell, right? You want to find me because I do 10 different things. I put as many keywords as I could, and I would bubble up in terms of my my search engine results. Not so anymore. In fact, if anything, search engines ignore meta tag keyword searches. They look for other things. They look for headline tag or heading tag, especially H1s, right? Because that's how they'll appear in your search results, right? They look for content. They look for semantic HTML, right? This kind of stuff. So if you don't structure your code this way, and if you go to the old way and use generic tags like a div tag, you will not bubble up as high on the search engine results organically, I'll put it that way, as you would if you use semantic HTML, all right? We're going to talk more about that, but we're going to get to that. I'm going to take a short break because it's 9:13. We kind of went kind of a long one. And then when we come back, I want to get right into the PowerPoint presentations to support what I've just done here, okay? So let's pause for a 10-minute break.